My name is Francesca Morgan, a woman who has always been considered rather unconventional for these times. When I opened my eyes that fateful morning and found myself returned to my 16th year, my heart was filled with a turbulent mix of emotions. Memories of my previous life flooded back like a rushing tide, all the pain, the betrayal, and ultimately the despair that had consumed my final days were as vivid as if they had happened yesterday. This time, I vowed, I would not make the same mistakes again. In my former life, I had been an innocent, romantic young woman who harbored beautiful dreams about the world around me. I had fallen deeply in love with the brilliant scholar Barnaby Harrison, a man of exceptional literary talent whom I first encountered on a golden autumn day when the sweet osmanthus flowers perfumed the air. His poetry flowed like clouds across water, and every gesture he made spoke of refined elegance and scholarly grace. I believed what we shared was true love, convinced that we would have a perfect future together. However, reality dealt me the cruelest blow imaginable. Though Barnaby had achieved the highest honors in the imperial examinations, earning the title of top scholar, he came from humble origins and lacked the powerful family connections that mattered so much in our society. Meanwhile, Valentina Ashford, daughter of the Prime Minister, possessed not only an illustrious family background, but beauty that could topple kingdoms. When the Emperor decreed their marriage, granting her to Barnaby as his bride, my world crumbled completely. What wounded me even more deeply was that Barnaby accepted this arrangement with apparent joy. He explained to me that marrying Valentina was essential for his career advancement, necessary for establishing his position at court. He claimed his feelings for me were genuine, but insisted that marriage and love could exist separately. He even had the audacity to suggest I become his concubine, arguing this would allow us to remain together. In that moment, my heart died completely. I realized that in his eyes, I wasn't even worthy of being considered as a proper wife. I angrily rejected his proposal and chose instead to marry Matthias Sterling, a groom who worked in our household stables. Matthias was a man of few words, tall and powerfully built, his hands calloused from years of hard labor. His background was shrouded in mystery. Some said he had originally been the son of a military general who had fallen from grace and was reduced to working as a stable hand. Regardless of the truth, when I was at my most desperate, he offered me a home. However, my former self was tragically naive. I believed that marrying Matthias would be the perfect revenge against Barnaby, never realizing what consequences this decision would bring. After our wedding, I treated Matthias with cold indifference, my heart still pining for that faithless scholar. Matthias silently endured my coldness without ever uttering a single complaint. When war broke out and Matthias was conscripted into the army, he spoke to me before his departure. "My lady, I understand your heart belongs to another, but since you are my wife, I have a responsibility to protect you. This campaign ahead is fraught with danger, and if I cannot return, you should feel free to remarry. There is no need to remain faithful to my memory." At the time, I merely nodded coldly, thinking to myself that it would be better if he died. Then I would be free. Yet fate delights in playing cruel tricks. Matthias distinguished himself repeatedly on the battlefield, rising from a common soldier to become a general, eventually earning the title of Marquis. When news of his triumphant return reached me, my emotions were too complex to describe. By then, Barnaby had already married Valentina and was enjoying great success in his official career, basking in the glory of his achievements. Ironically, I, as a general's wife, held a more prestigious position than the Prime Minister's daughter-in-law, yet I felt no joy whatsoever. Because I had discovered that my feelings for Matthias had changed without my realizing it. When I saw him return in his armor, magnificent and commanding as he rode his horse through the gates, my heart was stirred by an inexplicable flutter. This man, whom I had once considered crude and unworthy, now radiated an irresistible charm. Sadly, I realized this too late. Though Matthias continued to treat me with respect and courtesy, I could sense that the warmth in his eyes had considerably dimmed. Perhaps the trials of war had taught him to view romantic attachments with detachment, or perhaps my years of coldness had irreparably wounded his heart. Whatever the reason, an invisible wall now stood between us, and we could never return to what we might have been. Worse still, Valentina had betrayed her marriage vows, eloping with an actor. This scandal created an enormous uproar throughout the capital, casting a shadow over Barnaby's political career. And I, foolish woman that I was, found my heart softening toward him during this difficult time, secretly visiting to offer comfort. Once, twice, 3 times, our meetings became increasingly frequent. I believed fate was offering us a second chance, never realizing that our rendezvous were being observed. One day, as I emerged from Barnaby's study, I encountered Matthias face to face. His eyes held shock, pain, and most devastatingly, profound disappointment. In that moment, I would have given anything to disappear into the earth itself. "My lady." His voice was soft, yet it struck my heart like a hammer blow. "I understand now." From that day forward, Matthias never returned home. I heard that he had won several more victories on the frontier and had been elevated to the position of General of the Northern Guard. Meanwhile, I had become the greatest laughingstock in the capital, an unfaithful general's wife. In the end, during a palace coup, Matthias died heroically in battle while protecting the young emperor. When the news reached me, I finally understood what I had lost. That man who had silently protected me would never return. As for Barnaby, the man I had once loved so deeply, upon learning of my widowhood, he actually proposed that I become his second wife. He claimed he had finally seen Valentina's true nature and realized that I was the one truly suited for him. I was almost driven to laughter by his shameless audacity. When I had needed him, he chose wealth and status over me. When I was a married woman, he encouraged me toward adultery. Now that I was widowed, he wanted me as his second wife. This man would only remember me when it served his purposes. I rejected him and chose a life of religious devotion, spending my remaining years in a temple. Until my dying breath, I was consumed by regret. Regret for not cherishing Matthias. Regret for not seeing through Barnaby's true character sooner. Now heaven had granted me the chance to begin again, and I was absolutely determined not to repeat the same mistakes. Opening my eyes, I found myself lying in my familiar bedroom, with the cheerful sound of birdsong drifting in from outside. The sunlight streaming through the delicate window lattice told me it was a beautiful morning. I gently touched the fine silk curtains beside my bed, their peony embroidery shimmering in the golden light. Rising from my bed, I walked to the bronze mirror and gazed at the youthful face reflected there. At 16, I was in the bloom of my beauty. My skin was like jade and cream, my eyes clear as autumn water. The ravages of my previous life's sorrows had not yet left their mark upon this face. "Miss, you're awake." My personal maid Emerald entered carrying warm water for washing. Seeing me standing before the mirror, she smiled brightly. "Miss, you look particularly radiant today, even more beautiful than usual." As I arranged my long black hair before the mirror, my mind was busy calculating my next moves. According to my previous life's timeline, today should be the first day I would encounter Barnaby. The elderly mistress of our household planned to take me to the city's largest temple to burn incense and pray, where Barnaby would conveniently appear. In my former life, I had viewed this as a destined meeting. Now I recognized it for what it truly was, a carefully orchestrated encounter. Emerald, are today's garments prepared? I asked while combing my hair. Yes, miss. The elderly mistress instructed that you should dress modestly today. I've already prepared that moon-white silk robe, Emerald replied, moving toward the clothing chest. I nodded, inwardly smirking. In my previous life, I had worn this exact moon-white robe when first meeting Barnaby. The garment featured delicate bamboo leaf embroidery on the sleeves and was cinched with a pale blue silk sash, creating an appearance of fresh, ethereal beauty. Barnaby had later composed a poem specifically praising this outfit, celebrating my moon-like grace and refinement. Now I suspected those supposedly spontaneous verses had been prepared well in advance. Emerald helped me with my morning toilette, and I watched in the bronze mirror as I gradually transformed into a picture of refinement. She arranged my hair in a simple but elegant style, securing it with a white jade hairpin and tucking a small jasmine blossom behind one ear. This styling was neither overly elaborate nor plain, perfectly showcasing my natural beauty. Miss, you seem different today, Emerald observed while adjusting my sash. I cannot quite say how, but you appear more spirited than before. I smiled at her reflection in the mirror. Perhaps I slept particularly well last night. In truth, I knew the change came from having a new purpose and hope. In my previous life, though well-born, I had been weak-willed and easily influenced by others. Now, having experienced life, death, and separation, my character had been completely transformed. After breakfast, the elderly mistress, Eleanor Hayes, sent someone to summon me. This lady was my maternal aunt, who had raised me from childhood, loving me as if I were her own daughter. Having lost her husband early and bearing no children of her own, she had treated me as her precious heir. I found her in her sitting room, enjoying her morning tea. Though already in her 50s, Aunt Eleanor maintained herself beautifully and appeared no more than 40. She wore a deep purple robe and a pearl-adorned cap presenting an image of dignified elegance. "Francesca, come and sit with me," she said with a warm smile upon seeing me approach. I curtsied respectfully before taking a seat beside her. "Today I shall take you to the Merciful Cloud Temple in the Eastern District to burn incense," she explained while pouring tea for me. "The goddess of mercy there is said to be particularly efficacious in matters of marriage. I wish to pray for a good match for you. You've reached the age where we must begin considering your future." Upon hearing the words "good match," my heart filled with bitter irony. In my previous life, I had also gone expectantly to pray for a favorable marriage, only to receive a lifetime of suffering in return. "I shall follow your arrangements completely, Aunt," I replied obediently, though my mind was already forming different plans. Since I knew Barnaby would appear at the temple, I needed to find a way to avoid him entirely. Or perhaps, from a different angle, I could ensure this meeting had a completely different outcome. Our carriage slowly departed from the estate gates, and through the window, I observed the familiar streetscapes. This ancient capital city, with its gray brick buildings and upturned eaves, possessed an timeless charm throughout. The streets bustled with activity, vendors calling their wares in a symphony of commerce, a truly prosperous scene. After approximately half an hour's journey, we arrived at Merciful Cloud Temple. The temple was built upon a small hill, requiring us to climb a series of stone steps to reach it. Before the mountain gate stood two imposing guardian statues, while above hung a plaque bearing the temple's name in elegant calligraphy. I followed Aunt Eleanor slowly up the stone steps, observing numerous devotees who had come to offer incense. Some were elaborately dressed noble ladies, others plainly clothed common people. Each face bore an expression of sincere devotion, hoping to receive divine blessings. Upon entering the temple, we first paid our respects in the main hall, then proceeded to the Goddess of Mercy Hall. Aunt Eleanor knelt for an extended period before the statue, her lips moving in silent prayer, undoubtedly requesting a good marriage for me. Though I also knelt there, my thoughts were focused on how to change my destiny. Just as we prepared to leave the Goddess of Mercy Hall, a familiar voice spoke from behind us. "This young lady has dropped something." My heart lurched violently. Without turning around, I knew exactly who it was. That voice, that tone, they were identical to my memories. I slowly turned and indeed saw Barnaby Harrison standing several steps away, holding a handkerchief in his hand. It was mine, embroidered with delicate orchid patterns, the same handkerchief that had fallen in my previous life. Barnaby appeared to be in his early 20s, tall and slender, with refined features. His moon-white scholar's robe enhanced his scholarly elegance, and his eyes held a gentle warmth that made him appear the perfect gentleman. In my previous life, I had been completely captivated at this moment, believing no man in the world could be more perfect than he. But now I could detect the calculated gleam hidden within his gaze. "Thank you, sir," I said coolly, reaching out to accept the handkerchief. My reaction clearly surprised Barnaby. According to his plan, I should have blushed with embarrassment, giving him the opportunity to engage me in conversation. But my indifference left him somewhat at a loss. "You're quite welcome," he stammered. "Are you here to pray for a favorable marriage?" This question caught Aunt Eleanor's attention. She studied Barnaby carefully, obviously favorably impressed by this handsome young man. "This young gentleman has a pleasant appearance. Might I ask which family you belong to?" she inquired with a smile. Barnaby immediately bowed respectfully. "This humble person is surnamed Harrison, given name Barnaby. I recently achieved the highest honors in the imperial examinations and have come to the temple today to offer prayers of gratitude." Upon hearing the word top scholar, Aunt Eleanor's eyes brightened noticeably. A top scholar, one selected from thousands of candidates, and so young and handsome besides. He would indeed make an excellent son-in-law. "So you are Scholar Harrison. I have heard much of your reputation," she responded with increased warmth. "I am Eleanor Hayes, and this is my niece, Francesca." A flash of satisfaction crossed Barnaby's eyes. This opening was proceeding even more smoothly than he had anticipated. He bowed to me again. "I am honored to meet Miss Francesca." I merely nodded slightly, showing no particular interest. This puzzled Barnaby, but he quickly adjusted his approach. "I noticed the young lady praying before the Goddess of Mercy just now. Perhaps you two were seeking a favorable marriage?" he inquired tentatively. "Yes," I replied simply, offering no opportunity to continue the conversation. Aunt Eleanor, observing our exchange, grew anxious. Such an excellent scholar, and Francesca was being so aloof. "Scholar Harrison, perhaps you would join us in exploring other areas of the temple?" she suggested proactively. "I've heard the scripture library here is quite famous, containing many precious texts." Barnaby's eyes lit up with pleasure. "That would be wonderful indeed. I happen to have some knowledge of Buddhist scriptures." Thus, our party of 3 proceeded toward the scripture library. Along the way, Barnaby continuously attempted to engage me in conversation, but my responses remained brief, leaving him increasingly puzzled. Upon reaching the scripture library, Aunt Eleanor excused herself to examine other areas, deliberately leaving Barnaby and me alone together. This was clearly her intentional arrangement, creating an opportunity for private conversation. "Miss Francesca, I feel as though we have met before." Barnaby finally said directly. Do you have this same feeling? This was his standard approach to starting conversations. In my previous life, I had actually believed this was fate's arrangement. Now I recognized it as nothing more than a clumsy pretense. No, I replied coolly. I believe this is our first meeting. Barnaby was somewhat embarrassed by my direct rejection, but he didn't give up. He approached a bookshelf, randomly selected a scripture, and began eloquently explaining its contents. I must admit that Barnaby was genuinely talented. His understanding of Buddhist scriptures was profound, and his explanations were articulate and engaging. In my previous life, I had been conquered by his intellectual gifts, believing myself fortunate to potentially marry such a scholar. But now I understood that talent alone was insufficient. A man's most important qualities were loyalty and responsibility, and Barnaby possessed neither. The young lady seems uninterested in Buddhist philosophy, Barnaby asked somewhat disappointedly, noticing my distraction. I simply feel that theoretical discussion has little meaning, I replied calmly. True Buddhist practice lies in inner cultivation, not in understanding texts. This response surprised Barnaby. He clearly hadn't expected such profound words from a sheltered young lady. The young lady speaks very wisely, he said sincerely. It seems I have much yet to learn. I glanced at him, thinking, if you could truly learn inner cultivation, you wouldn't have behaved as you did in my previous life. At this moment, Aunt Eleanor returned. Seeing what she believed was an animated conversation between us, her face showed satisfaction. It's getting late. We should return home, she announced. Scholar Harrison, it has been a pleasure meeting you today. The feeling is mutual, Barnaby said, casting a reluctant glance my way. I wonder if there might be opportunities to meet again. This was an obvious hint. He hoped to continue developing our relationship. When fate permits, we shall naturally meet again, I replied ambiguously, neither rejecting nor encouraging him too much. During our journey home, Aunt Eleanor continuously praised Barnaby. She described him as handsome and accomplished, a top scholar with apparent good character, an excellent marriage prospect. I listened silently without expressing any opinion. Aunt Eleanor assumed my silence indicated shyness, which made her even more enthusiastic about describing Barnaby's virtues. Upon returning to our estate, I went directly to my room. Emerald noticed my strange expression and asked with concern, Miss, did something happen at the temple today? You appear rather preoccupied. Nothing significant. I'm simply tired, I said, sitting before my dressing table and staring into the mirror. Actually, I was considering how to change the story's direction, knowing its intended course. The most direct approach would be to completely avoid Barnaby, but this wouldn't be easy. Given Aunt Eleanor's current favorable impression of him, she would certainly attempt to bring us together. Moreover, my previous life's tragedy wasn't merely due to choosing the wrong man. More importantly, I had wronged Matthias. Thinking of Matthias stirred complex emotions within me. In my former life, I only understood his worth after losing him. Now, given this chance to begin again, I was determined to treasure him properly. However, the current problem was that I hadn't yet encountered Matthias and didn't even know where to find him. According to my previous life's memories, I had married him in anger after rejecting Barnaby's proposal, choosing him almost randomly. But the situation was different now. I didn't want to endure that painful process again. I needed to actively seek out Matthias rather than passively wait for fate's arrangements. Early the next morning, I began implementing my plan. I instructed Emerald to inquire about all the male servants in our household, particularly those responsible for the stables. "Miss, why do you want to know about these matters?" Emerald asked, puzzled. "I want to understand our household's operations better," I said, finding a casual excuse. "Horses are very important, and those who care for them deserve recognition." Though Emerald found this strange, she followed my instructions and gathered the information. By evening, she returned with detailed news. "Miss, there are 6 grooms in our household. One named Matthias Sterling has a particularly mysterious background. Some say he was originally a general's son who fell into misfortune and ended up here. He speaks little but has exceptional skill with horses. He's the most capable of all the grooms." Hearing this name, my heart began racing. It was indeed him, my previous life's husband. "Where is he now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He should be in the stables. This is feeding time for the horses," Emerald replied. I stood up and straightened my clothing. "I want to visit the stables." Emerald was shocked. "Miss, you want to go to the stables? The smell there is quite strong, and it's not really appropriate for someone of your status." "That's fine. I simply want to see our household's horses," I insisted. Left with no choice, Emerald accompanied me toward the stables. The stables were located at the very rear of our estate, consisting of a row of low buildings. Even before approaching closely, we could smell the horses and hay. For someone accustomed to the fragrances of an elegant chamber, this was indeed somewhat overwhelming. When we reached the stable entrance, I saw a familiar figure. It was a tall man feeding the horses. His movements were gentle, as if caring for his own children. The horses remained calm in his presence, clearly trusting him completely. This was Matthias Sterling, my previous life's husband. Even in such humble surroundings, he possessed a special quality. His features were well defined, with a noble bearing between his brows. Though dressed in coarse cloth, he couldn't conceal his innate aristocratic bearing. I stood quietly in the doorway, observing him, my heart filling with indescribable emotions. This man had sacrificed so much for me in our previous life, yet I had remained blind to it all. "Miss?" Emerald whispered, reminding me. "Shall we go inside?" At that moment, Matthias seemed to sense something and looked toward the doorway. Our gazes met, and I saw surprise flash through his eyes. He immediately set down his work and approached us. "Good day, miss," he said respectfully, his voice deep and resonant. Up close, he was even more handsome than I remembered. Time had not yet carved many lines of hardship into his face. He was at the prime of masculine appeal. "You are Matthias Sterling?" I asked, trying to keep my voice natural. "Yes, miss," he replied, looking somewhat puzzled about why I had come here. "I've heard you're very skilled at caring for horses," I continued. "I simply do what is required of me," he answered modestly. I entered the stables and carefully observed the conditions inside. Though humble, everything was meticulously clean. Each horse was well cared for, with glossy coats and bright spirits. "These horses all look very healthy," I complimented. "Thank you for the praise, miss," Matthias said, warmth flickering in his eyes. I stopped before a black stallion that was particularly large and magnificent, though its eyes held a somewhat wild and untamed spirit. "This horse is quite special," I said, reaching out to stroke it, but Matthias stopped me. "Please be careful, miss. This horse has a fierce temperament and might cause injury," he warned with concern. "It simply hasn't met the right master yet," I said with a smile. "Sometimes those who appear most untamed are actually the most loyal." My words carried deeper meaning, and Matthias seemed to sense something, his expression becoming complex. At that moment, hurried footsteps approached from outside. A maid ran up, breathless, saying, "Miss, the elderly mistress is looking for you. She says there are visitors." I knew it must be Barnaby. According to my previous life's timeline, today he would come to our estate for a formal visit, expressing his desire to marry me. I understand. I'll come immediately, I replied, then turned to Matthias. I very much enjoyed our conversation today. The pleasure was mine, miss, he said respectfully. As I left the stables, my heart remained unsettled for a long time. Meeting Matthias confirmed one thing for me. My feelings for him were genuine. Not from guilt, not from sympathy, but from sincere love. Now the question was, how could I make him love me in return? In my previous life, our union had been based on my spite, with no solid foundation. This time, I hoped we could truly love each other and walk through life hand in hand. Returning to the main hall, I indeed found Barnaby sitting there, discussing something with Aunt Eleanor. Today, he wore a brand new robe, his hair meticulously groomed. Clearly, he had dressed with special care. Seeing me enter, he immediately stood and bowed. Good day, Miss Francesca. Scholar Harrison, I replied coolly with a curtsy. Aunt Eleanor smiled warmly. Francesca, Scholar Harrison has come specifically to visit us today. You young people should have more opportunities to chat. She then excused herself, obviously wanting to create a private moment for us. After meeting you at the temple yesterday, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Barnaby expressed his feelings directly. I wonder what impression you have of me. A very good impression, I replied politely. A top scholar with such talent is truly admirable. Hearing my praise, satisfaction flashed in Barnaby's eyes. He believed I had already been conquered by his intellectual gifts. Actually, I came today to ask for your hand in marriage, he said, gathering his courage. I hope to make you my wife. These words came faster than I had expected. In my previous life, he had deliberated for several more days before formally proposing. Now he was being quite direct. This is very sudden, I said, feigning surprise. I need time to consider. I understand, Barnaby said gently. I shall await your answer. But I could see in his expression that he was quite confident, believing I would certainly accept. After all, he was a top scholar and handsome besides. For an ordinary official's daughter, this would indeed be an excellent choice. Unfortunately, he didn't realize I had already seen through his true nature. Over the following days, Barnaby visited our estate almost daily, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes poetry, sometimes Buddhist texts he had copied himself. His offensive was quite intense, with Aunt Eleanor continually adding her endorsement. But I maintained my distance throughout, neither clearly rejecting him nor giving him excessive hope. Meanwhile, I began appearing frequently near the stables, sometimes to see the horses, sometimes just passing by, always finding ways to interact more with Matthias. Initially, he was puzzled by my behavior, even somewhat wary. After all, it was indeed strange for a young lady to constantly visit the stables. But gradually, he seemed to grow accustomed to my presence, even occasionally initiating conversation. Miss, why do you come to the stables so often recently? He finally asked one day. I enjoy the peace here, I answered honestly. In this place, I can temporarily forget my troubles. Troubles? He looked at me with concern. Someone wants to marry me, but I don't care for him. I sighed. Complex emotions flashed through Matthias's eyes. He wanted to comfort me, but felt that given his status, anything he said would be inappropriate. Matters of lifelong importance should be carefully considered, he finally said. What kind of man do you think would be worth entrusting one's life to? I deliberately asked. This question put Matthias in a difficult position. As a groom, he shouldn't really participate in a young lady's personal matters. But seeing my expectant expression, he thought seriously before responding. I believe character is most important, he said slowly. Having responsibility and reliability, being able to protect those he loves. Other things like talent or family background are secondary. This answer satisfied me greatly. This was Matthias, always putting character first. What about you? I boldly asked. What kind of wife would you want? This question surprised him, and then he smiled bitterly. Someone like me probably has no right to choose. Why do you say that? I pressed. I'm merely a groom of humble birth. What right do I have to discuss such matters? He said self-deprecatingly. Birth doesn't determine a person's worth, I said seriously. I've seen many people of noble birth but base character, and others of humble origin but noble spirit. True nobility lies in the nobility of the heart, not in bloodline. Matthias looked at me in surprise, clearly not expecting such words from me. Your insights are very profound, miss, he said sincerely. But you still haven't answered my question, I persisted. What would your ideal wife be like? He remained silent for a long time, then said quietly, I would hope she would be a kind person, able to understand and accept my shortcomings. I don't expect her to be extraordinarily beautiful or of high status. I would only ask that she be willing to face life's difficulties with me. This response warmed my heart. This was the Matthias I remembered, always so honest, so sincere. And I mean if, I gathered my courage to say, if there were a young lady willing to marry you, what would you do? This hypothetical question completely stunned Matthias. He stared at me, his eyes full of disbelief. Miss, what are you saying? He stammered. I'm saying if there were a young lady who appreciated your character and was willing to overlook your birth to become your wife, would you be willing? I looked directly into his eyes. Various complex expressions crossed Matthias's face, shock, disbelief, and a deeply hidden hope. Miss, such a thing would be impossible, he finally said. The gulf between us is too great. Gulfs are created by people, I said firmly. If two people truly love each other, what gulf cannot be bridged? My words left Matthias completely silent. He lowered his head, apparently deep in thought. At that moment, Emerald hurried over. Miss, the elderly mistress wants you to return quickly. Scholar Harrison has come again and brought many gifts. I frowned. It seemed Barnaby was growing impatient and preparing to intensify his efforts. I understand, I told Emerald, then turned to Matthias. Our conversation isn't finished. We'll talk again another day. After leaving the stables, my heart remained unsettled. Though our conversation hadn't been explicit, I believed Matthias should understand my meaning. Now I would see how he would respond. Returning to the main hall, I indeed found Barnaby seated there with a large array of gifts spread before him. There were precious jewelry, fine silks, and some rare books. Francesca, see how thoughtful Scholar Harrison is. These gifts were all specially selected for you, Aunt Eleanor said with a delighted expression. Barnaby stood up and said elegantly, a small token of my appreciation. I hope you will like them. I glanced at the gifts. They were indeed valuable, but I felt no interest whatsoever. Scholar Harrison, you are too generous. These things are too precious. I cannot accept them. I declined politely, but firmly. This response surprised Barnaby, and Aunt Eleanor anxiously gave me meaningful looks from the side. Miss, this represents my sincere feelings. Please do accept them, Barnaby pleaded earnestly. I appreciate the sentiment, but please take the gifts back, I insisted. Seeing my lack of courtesy, Aunt Eleanor's expression darkened. Suppressing her anger, she said, "Francesca, how can you be so inconsiderate? Scholar Harrison shows such kindness, and you refuse him." "Aunt, it's not that I'm inconsiderate. I simply feel we aren't familiar enough to exchange valuable gifts," I explained calmly. This statement made Barnaby's expression sour as well. He clearly hadn't expected me to refuse him so publicly. "Since the young lady feels this way, I'll set them aside for a more appropriate time," he said with a forced smile. "I'm afraid there won't be an appropriate time." I finally decided to be direct. "Scholar Harrison, I don't believe we are suitable for each other." This statement struck like thunder, stunning everyone present. Aunt Eleanor turned pale with rage. "Francesca, what are you saying?" she demanded sternly. "I'm speaking the truth," I replied calmly. "Scholar Harrison and I are indeed incompatible. Our personalities and values are quite different. Even if we were forced together, it wouldn't lead to happiness." Barnaby's expression became very unpleasant. He probably never imagined being rejected so directly by a woman, especially so publicly. "Miss, have I done something wrong?" he asked, barely containing his anger. "I can change." "It's not your fault. We simply aren't compatible," I maintained. "Matters of the heart cannot be forced." Aunt Eleanor could no longer restrain herself. "Francesca, go to your room. I need to have a serious talk with you." I knew a scolding was inevitable, but I didn't regret my decision. Since I had chosen a different path from my previous life, I had to accept the consequences. "Scholar Harrison, I apologize for today's discourtesy," I curtsied to Barnaby. "I hope you will find someone truly suitable for you." With that, I rose and left the main hall, leaving behind a furious Aunt Eleanor and an embarrassed Barnaby. Shortly after returning to my room, Aunt Eleanor stormed in angrily. "Francesca, what has gotten into you today?" she demanded furiously. "Such an excellent scholar, and you reject him? Do you know what kind of good husband you could find after missing this opportunity?" "Aunt, I have my reasons," I said calmly. "Reasons? What reasons could you possibly have?" she raged. "You're a sheltered young woman. What considerations could you have? Marriage should be decided by elders. What right do you have to refuse?" "Because I don't love him," I said bluntly. This reason momentarily stunned Aunt Eleanor, who then laughed coldly. "Love? Do you understand what love is? Marriage isn't child's play that can be sustained by so-called love. You need a talented husband with prospects, not some ephemeral romance." "What if I told you I already have someone in my heart?" I said deliberately. Aunt Eleanor was shocked. "What? You have someone in your heart? Who? How do I not know about this?" "The groom in our household, Matthias Sterling," I said with gathered courage. This statement completely stunned Aunt Eleanor. She stared wide-eyed, speechless for a long moment. What did you say? A groom?" she almost screamed. "Francesca, have you lost your mind? You actually fancy a stable hand?" "Though he is a groom, his character is more noble than many so-called gentlemen," I said firmly. Aunt Eleanor trembled with rage. "Character? Can character put food on the table? If you marry a groom, where will our family's reputation go? How will your deceased parents rest in peace?" "Aunt, please don't become upset." I tried to calm her. "I know this sounds absurd, but I'm serious." "Serious?" she laughed coldly. "I think you've been bewitched by that groom. Starting tomorrow, you're forbidden from going to the stables or seeing that man again." "Aunt, there's no room for discussion," she said decisively. "I absolutely will not allow you to do something so ridiculous. Tomorrow, I'll have that groom expelled from our estate." Hearing this, I became alarmed. "Aunt, you can't do that. He's done nothing wrong." "His wrong is seducing you," she said angrily. A mere servant daring to set his sights on a young lady. Absolutely outrageous. He didn't seduce me. I was the one who initiated everything, I declared loudly. This has nothing to do with him. Aunt Eleanor became even more furious at my words. You're still defending him? You really have been completely bewitched. I'm going right now to have him thrown out. She started toward the door, but I quickly blocked her path. Aunt, please don't do this. If you insist on expelling him, then I'll leave with him. I had reached my limit. This statement completely stunned Aunt Eleanor. She stared at me, eyes full of disbelief. You're threatening me? She asked with a trembling voice. I'm not threatening, I'm telling the truth, I said firmly. I will marry no one but him in this lifetime. If you don't consent, then I'll elope with him. Aunt Eleanor was shocked by my resolute attitude. She probably never imagined that I, who had always been compliant, would say such things. You really have gone mad, she said, shaking her head. For a groom, you'd give up your status and position? Do you know what elopement means? It means you can never return home, means everyone will look down on you. I don't care, I said calmly. As long as I can be with him, I'm willing to endure anything. Aunt Eleanor looked at me with deep disappointment and pain in her eyes. She probably never expected the niece she had cherished since childhood to become like this. Fine, very well, she said angrily. Since you're so disobedient, I won't concern myself with you anymore. Do whatever you want, but don't expect me to approve of this match. With that, she slammed the door and left, leaving me alone in the room. I knew my words had hurt her, but I had no other choice. If I didn't demonstrate my determination firmly, she wouldn't believe my resolve. Now the question was, how should I express my feelings to Matthias? After the argument with Aunt Eleanor, I was even more certain of my decision. I couldn't passively wait for fate's arrangements as I had in my previous life. I needed to actively pursue my own happiness. Early the next morning, I went to the stables. Matthias was cleaning when he saw me arrive, looking somewhat surprised. Miss, you're here quite early today, he said. I have something to tell you, I said directly. He set down his work and gave me his full attention. About our conversation yesterday, have you given it any thought? I asked. Matthias's expression became complex. Miss, those things you said, I think you might have spoken in a moment of impulse. I wasn't being impulsive, I said earnestly. I've thought this through carefully. I care for you and want to marry you. Saying these words aloud, I felt my heart might burst from my chest. In my previous life, I had never actively confessed to anyone. This was my first time. Matthias was shocked by my directness. He opened his mouth but couldn't speak. I know you feel the gulf between us is too great, I continued. But in my view, none of that matters. What matters is whether we truly love each other. Miss, he finally spoke, his voice trembling. Do you truly understand what you're saying? If you marry me, it means abandoning everything you have now, means living an ordinary life. Can you bear that? I can, I answered without hesitation. As long as I can be with you, I'm willing to give up everything. Matthias looked at me deeply, his eyes showing both emotion and pain. But I cannot be so selfish, he said. I cannot let you sacrifice so much for me. You should marry someone like Scholar Harrison and live a life of wealth and comfort. I don't want a life of wealth. I want a life of true love, I said firmly. And who says you couldn't give me happiness? In my eyes, you're better than anyone else. My words brought tears to Matthias's eyes. He probably never imagined anyone would say such things to him. Miss, would you really be willing to marry me? He asked with a trembling voice. I would, I said solemnly. From this moment on, I am your fiancé. Hearing this, Matthias could no longer control his emotions. he knelt down and took my hands. "Miss, no, Francesca. I swear I will spend my life protecting and loving you," he said with deep feeling. "Even if the whole world opposes us, I will never abandon you." Seeing this man's sincere expression, warmth flooded my heart. This was the happiness I had missed in my previous life. This time, I would hold it tight. "Then it's settled," I said with a smile. "From now on, we are a couple." Matthias nodded vigorously, his eyes bright with happiness. Just as we were immersed in our sweet moment, commotion arose outside. Soon a group of people burst into the stables, led by the furious Aunt Eleanor. "Just as I suspected. Here they are." She pointed at us angrily. "I knew you were up to something." Matthias and I quickly stood up, but we didn't release our joined hands. "Aunt," I said calmly. "Don't call me aunt. I have no shameless niece like you," she raged. "Publicly embracing a servant? Do you have no sense of propriety?" "I'm with my fiancé. What's improper about that?" I said frankly. "Fiancé?" Aunt Eleanor laughed coldly. "Who acknowledged him as your fiancé? I absolutely will not approve of this match." "Then your approval isn't necessary," I said calmly. "I'm of age and have the right to decide my own marriage." Aunt Eleanor's face turned purple with rage. "Fine, very well. Since you're so disobedient, I'll discipline you properly on behalf of your deceased parents." She gestured to several household guards behind her. "Take the young lady back and confine her. No one may release her without my permission." The guards immediately moved forward to seize me, but Matthias stepped protectively in front of me. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked warily. "A mere servant dares to obstruct us?" Aunt Eleanor sneered. "Seize him as well." The guards immediately surrounded us, trying to subdue Matthias, but they had underestimated his martial skills. Though he had been working as a groom for years, the combat abilities developed during his military service hadn't been neglected. Matthias dodged the first attacker's assault with fluid grace, then struck back, knocking his opponent down with a single blow. The other guards, seeing this, became even more aggressive and rushed forward together. However, Matthias's martial arts were indeed superior. Even outnumbered, he fought with ease. Soon, all the guards had been defeated. This scene shocked everyone present. No one had expected a groom to possess such exceptional fighting skills. Who are you really?" Aunt Eleanor asked in terror. Matthias didn't answer her, instead turning to me. "Francesca, we're leaving." I nodded without hesitation and followed him toward the stable entrance. "Stop!" Aunt Eleanor shouted. "Francesca, if you leave with him now, you can never return to this house." I paused and looked back at her. "Aunt, thank you for caring for me all these years, but now I must live for my own happiness." With that, Matthias and I walked hand in hand out of the estate. After leaving our family home, we took temporary shelter at an inn outside the city. Matthias used his accumulated savings to rent us a simple but clean room. Though the conditions couldn't compare to my former chamber, my heart felt more peaceful than ever before. "Francesca, do you regret this?" Matthias asked that night as he gently stroked my hair. "How could I regret it?" I said, leaning against his chest and feeling his strong heartbeat. This was the most correct decision I've ever made. The next day, we began planning our future life. Matthias revealed that he wasn't actually of common groom origins. He was originally the second son of the Sterling military family, but when his father was framed by corrupt officials and the family fell from grace, he was forced to live under an assumed identity as a stable hand. "If that's the case, why not seek justice for your father?" I asked with concern. "The time isn't right yet," Matthias said, determination flashing in his eyes. "But now, with war breaking out on the frontier, it's time for men to serve their country. I want to rejoin the military and prove myself through my own abilities, both to serve the nation and clear my father's name. I supported his decision. Though military life meant separation and danger, I knew this was his true calling. A real man should have his own ideals and ambitions. Just as we were preparing to depart for the frontier, an unexpected event occurred. Barnaby suddenly appeared at our inn. He looked haggard, as if he hadn't rested properly for several days. "Francesca, I've been searching for you for so long," he said wearily. "Please come back with me." "I will never return," I replied calmly. "I've made my choice." "You choose a groom? Abandon a comfortable life?" Barnaby asked incredulously. "Do you know what being with him means? It means wandering homeless, means going hungry." "So what?" I said indifferently. "As long as we love each other, we can overcome any difficulty." Barnaby's expression darkened. "Love? You think love can put food on the table? When you've suffered enough hardship, you'll understand my worth." "I will never understand that," I said decisively, "because in my heart, he is 1,000 times, 10,000 times better than you." These words deeply wounded Barnaby's pride. He glared angrily at Matthias. "You despicable groom! What methods did you use to bewitch her?" Matthias looked at him coldly. "I used no methods. Francesca chose me of her own free will." "Free will?" Barnaby laughed coldly. "A noble young lady would freely choose a groom? You expect me to believe such nonsense?" "Believe it or not," Matthias said indifferently. "That's simply the truth." Enraged by his composure, Barnaby suddenly drew his sword. "I'll eliminate this threat to Francesca." He thrust the blade toward Matthias, but Matthias's martial skills far exceeded his. With a simple sidestep and grappling move, Matthias disarmed him. "Scholar Harrison, enough," Matthias said, tossing the sword to the ground. "We have no deep enmity. Why go this far?" Barnaby collapsed to the floor, his eyes full of resentment and rage. He probably never imagined that he, a top scholar, would be defeated by a groom. "Fine, very well," he said through gritted teeth. "Mark my words. I won't let you get away with this." He then left the inn in humiliation. I knew someone like Barnaby wouldn't give up easily. True enough, the next day soldiers came to arrest us, claiming someone had reported us for improper conduct that offended public morals. This was clearly Barnaby's revenge, but we had prepared for this. Before the soldiers arrived, we had quietly left the inn and begun our journey to the frontier. Though the road was difficult, I felt happier than ever before. Being with the man I loved, even as wandering refugees, was far better than being alone in a luxurious chamber. Upon reaching the frontier, Matthias quickly gained recognition for his exceptional martial skills and military acumen. Meanwhile, though I lived the simple life of a military camp, my heart overflowed with contentment. War soon erupted. Enemy forces attacked fiercely, and the frontier situation became critical. In these circumstances, Matthias demonstrated his true capabilities. His strategic plans repeatedly led to victory, and he rapidly rose from common soldier to captain, then to colonel, and finally to deputy general. As his military achievements accumulated, the court began investigating Matthias's background. Eventually, the truth emerged. His father had indeed been wrongly accused by corrupt officials. The court cleared the sterling family name and posthumously honored his father with the title of loyal marquis. Thus, our social status was completely transformed. Matthias was no longer a humble groom, but a distinguished general and son of the loyal marquis, and I had changed from a runaway rebellious daughter to a respected general's wife. When news of our triumphant return reached the capital, the entire city was in an uproar. Those who had once looked down on us now had to look up to us with respect. Upon hearing the news, Aunt Eleanor immediately sent people to invite me home. In her letter, she expressed regret for her earlier impulsiveness and hoped I would forgive her and return for a family reunion. Reading this belated recognition, my feelings were complex. I didn't hate Aunt Eleanor. After all, she had meant well for me. We simply had different definitions of happiness. "Would you like to go back and visit?" Matthias asked gently. "Yes, she did raise me for many years, after all," I nodded. So we returned to the capital we had left behind. When our carriage stopped before the estate gates, Aunt Eleanor was already waiting with all the household staff. Seeing me, travel-worn but radiant, tears welled in her eyes. "Francesca, my dear child, you've finally come home," she said with a trembling voice. "Aunt," I said, stepping forward to support her. "I was wrong. I was too stubborn before," she said, grasping my hands. "If I had known General Matthias had such background and abilities, I never would have opposed you." Hearing this, I felt somewhat bitter. In Aunt Eleanor's mind, a person's worth still depended on status and position. If Matthias had remained forever just a groom, she would never have accepted us. But I didn't express these thoughts. Instead, I smiled and said, "Let the past remain in the past. Now we're reunited as a family, and that's enough." Aunt Eleanor nodded happily, her eyes full of pride and satisfaction in us. After staying at the estate for several days, we received unexpected news. Barnaby was dead. Apparently, after our departure, he had fallen into depression from the humiliation and later became implicated in certain legal cases, leading to his dismissal from office. In his despair and depression, he chose to take his own life. Hearing this news, I felt little emotional response. In my previous life, I would have grieved for his death, but now I understood it was the consequence of his own actions. A man who didn't know how to cherish sincere affection and only pursued fame and fortune was destined for a bad end. In contrast, the formerly proud Prime Minister's daughter, Valentina Ashford, was not faring well either. After eloping with an actor, she had lived a wandering existence before being abandoned by her lover. Now she lived alone, selling her jewelry to survive, no longer the pampered young lady of former days. These developments made me even more grateful for my choice. If I had insisted on marrying Barnaby in my previous life, I would probably be in a similar situation now. Several months later, the court issued an edict promoting Matthias to Commander General of the North, with hereditary honors. I was also granted the title of First-Rank Lady. At the investiture ceremony, I stood beside Matthias as he received the emperor's appointment, my heart full of pride and happiness. This man had proven his worth through his ability and character, and had also proven the correctness of my choice. After the ceremony, we returned to our general's mansion. This residence was even more magnificent than the estate where I had grown up. But what made me feel most at home was that its master was the man I deeply loved. "Do you regret it?" Matthias asked the familiar question once again. "How could I regret it?" I replied with a smile. "I've gained the most precious thing in the world." "What's that?" he asked curiously. "True love," I said seriously. "In this world, what could be more precious than hearts that truly love each other?" Matthias held me tightly. "Francesca, thank you for your choice back then. Without your persistence, I never would have achieved today's success." "No, I should thank you," I whispered in his embrace. "You showed me what true happiness means." A year later, we had our first child, a healthy and adorable boy. Holding the baby, I thought of my previous life's lonely end and felt overwhelmed with emotion. Without the chance of rebirth, I never would have known what I had missed. That man who had silently protected me, that deep and sincere love, and this complete and happy family, None of these had belonged to my previous life. Now I finally understood that true happiness doesn't lie in external glamour, but in inner fulfillment and satisfaction. A person who truly loves you, a relationship of mutual support, a warm family. These seemingly ordinary things are actually the world's most precious treasures. Years later, when we both had graying temples, I still remembered that sunny afternoon when I first saw Matthias in the stables. It was that moment of attraction that changed my entire life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been reborn, if I hadn't seen through Barnaby's true nature, if I hadn't had the courage to choose Matthias. But these hypothetical questions no longer matter because I chose the right path and found the happiness I desired. In this life, I have no regrets.